Chapter 1. An autumn afternoon in the outskirts of Vermont was beginning to sink into a soft, tender light, as if the entire sky had wrapped itself in a thin amber cloak. The dusty red dirt road leading to Tom's farm was almost completely deserted. From the faraway mountains, the wind carried the scent of pine resin and the dampness of decaying leaves, weaving through a row of blazing red maples before sliding down onto the faded yellow grass in the yard. Fallen leaves rustled like the whispers of time, swirling gently around the weathered porch. In the field behind the house, a flock of sparrows took flight in haste as the sun began to sink, casting long golden shafts of light through the trunks of ancient trees. From the porch swing, old and creaky, came a lonely, rhythmic squeak in the wind. The air was so still that one could clearly hear the thud of a ripe apple dropping onto the damp earth. Everything evoked a calm, familiar afternoon, just like hundreds of others before it, until that sound broke the quiet. At first, it was faint, a strange, intermittent noise echoed from the old wooden barn standing off to the side of the property, an area Tom rarely visited. There was the soft clink of metal against metal, followed by a thin, strained hiss, as though something was trying to move but was being held back. Tom, standing in the kitchen doorway with the last sip of his evening coffee, immediately looked up, his eyebrows furrowed, not quite from worry, but because after more than 10 years living here, he knew every sound this land could make, and this one was different. Tom stepped onto the porch. The soles of his boots crushed the dry maple leaves beneath them. Each step crackling sharply, the barn emerged in the fading light, weathered gray planks, a roof of worn shingles mottled with moss, and a door left ajar like the tired mouth of something too old to close. A sliver of sunset pierced through the gap, carving a deep golden stripe onto the dusty floor inside. He stopped right at the doorway, his hand resting on the rusted hinge. From the shadows within, something shifted ever so slightly, and then Tom saw them, a pair of eyes, not the wary, skittish gaze of a stray cat or the bright darting glance of a gray squirrel, but round, dark eyes, glimmering with a strange light, a mix of caution and an aching, quiet pain. Tom's heartbeat skipped. Those eyes stared straight into him, bridging the empty space between two unfamiliar beings. There was something unmistakably human in that look, a silent plea for help. A cool gust slipped through the crack in the door, carrying the scent of dampness and dry leaves, making the moment feel even more still and more tense. And then, in his mind, as if from an unseen storyteller watching everything, came a voice. Tom did not yet know that this small creature would unravel a secret powerful enough to change his life forever. Chapter 2. Tom gently pushed the heavy wooden door. The hinges screeched with a sharp, grating cry, making those eyes blink and retreat slightly into the shadows. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying with it the scent of long damp timber, mixed with something more pungent, the musky smell of animal fur, sweat, and blood. The orange-gold light of sunset crept inside, slowly revealing the shape of the intruder, a raccoon. Its gray and black banded fur, which should have been sleek and glossy, was now tangled, matted into uneven clumps. One of its back legs stretched stiffly, the paw swollen, with streaks of dried blood clinging to its claws. Its breathing was quick and uneven, chest rising and falling sharply, yet its gaze never left him, half defensive, half pleading. Tom's first instinct was to drive it out. Around here, raccoons were often seen as troublemakers. They raided trash cans, knocked over livestock feed troughs, and sometimes carried disease. He had been annoyed by them more than a few times, but this time, it was as if his feet had been nailed to the floor. There was something in the animal's eyes that would not let him turn away. He crouched down, lowering himself in an effort to appear less threatening. In a quiet, steady tone, the same one he used for his old horses, he said, "Hey, it is all right." The raccoon did not move, but its ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice. Cautiously, Tom stepped closer, until the light was strong enough for him to see the wound clearly. There was a deep bite right at the ankle, the skin around it torn, bruised, and discolored. Tom had seen many bites before, from wolves, foxes, even the occasional bobcat, but this one was different. The teeth marks were uneven, the spacing between them narrower, and the angle of the punctures reminded him of a jaw he had never seen on any creature in this region. As he studied the injury, something else caught his attention. Near the animal's belly, tangled in the messy fur, something glinted silver in the fading light. He squinted, then gently parted the fur. It was a small, flat, round piece of metal, stuck to the fur with a thin layer of adhesive, its surface marred by faint scratches that almost looked like symbols. The raccoon let out a low hiss, twisting as if to hide the object from his view, but that only deepened his curiosity. Tom could feel a wave of questions rising inside him. Since when did raccoons around here carry any kind of device? And why did it bear such an unusual wound? A breeze slipped through the gap in the door, swinging it against the wall with a hollow thud. Tom's eyes flicked toward the open field beyond, where the dark silhouettes of trees trembled as though they were whispering to each other. In that instant, he had the unsettling sense that he had just stepped into something far larger than the simple act of helping an injured animal. He stood, taking a slow, deep breath. A decision was beginning to take shape in his mind, a decision that would lead him onto a path he had never imagined. And right here, in the dim, musty barn, it was only just beginning. Chapter 3. Tom carried the raccoon out of the barn, feeling its frail weight in his arms. Its fur was cold and damp, and its breathing was short and rapid. He brought it into his small wooden cabin, where the warm yellow glow of a table lamp cast a soft circle of light across the oak table. He placed it gently into an old wooden crate, lined with a wool blanket he usually used to wrap stray cats that wandered in during the winter. Beside it, he set a warm water bottle to help keep its body temperature steady. Tom sat down, slowed his breathing, and began to clean and dress the wound. He rinsed away the blood with salt water, then wrapped it in a thin layer of gauze. Every now and then, the animal flinched, but it never tried to run, as if it knew he meant no harm. Night fell faster than he expected. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in a deep, low howl. Tom sat at the table, sipping coffee, listening to the wind and the soft crackle of the fire in the stove. The cabin, usually silent, now carried a new rhythm. The weak, uneven breaths of the creature lying in that wooden crate. Around midnight, Tom woke suddenly. There was a sound, a faint scratching, followed by a soft metallic click. He went downstairs, the dim light from the bedside lamp stretching into the room. The raccoon was pawing frantically at the fur on its belly, right where Tom had seen that metallic object, its movements filled with desperate persistence. He knelt beside it, gently parting the tangled fur. The object came into full view, a small, flat, circular device, no larger than a coin, its metal rim faintly gleaming, with a tiny symbol etched in the center like a stylized letter. Tom turned it over in his hand. The back held a tiny LED light, blinking weakly. This was not something locals used. From his years working as a mechanical technician before retirement, he recognized it immediately, a miniature GPS tracking tag, the kind often used in wildlife research. But what made him pause was the marking on the metal face. It was not the emblem of a conservation group or a government research institute. It was an unfamiliar logo, sharp-edged, cold, industrial. He set the device on the table, booted up his old computer, and opened a search engine. A few lines describing the logo, along with the words, Wildlife GPS Tag, led him to a string of old news articles. A name appeared, North Track Industries, a private corporation once accused of using wild animals to test technology for extracting natural resources from forests. The articles were scattered, some already removed, but enough remained for Tom to know this was no small matter. One photograph froze him in place. Rows of animals locked inside metal cages, their eyes filled with the same frightened confusion as the raccoon in his crate. The article described how North Track had placed tracking devices on wildlife to study their movement patterns, allowing them to pinpoint locations of valuable resources deep in the forest. And sometimes, The animals fitted with these devices simply vanished without a trace. Tom sat in silence for several long minutes. He knew he had two choices: report it to the authorities, or find out the truth himself. But the memory of the raccoon's trembling eyes in the fading sunset came back to him. He could not shake the feeling that if he stayed out of it, no one would save this animal, or the others that might be out there. He looked over at the crate. The raccoon was curled up, eyes half closed, but its tail twitched slightly at the sound of his footsteps. Tom spoke softly, almost like a silent vow. "I am going to find out what is going on." And in that small wooden cabin, beneath the lone glow of a yellow lamp, the journey began, the journey he would not be able to turn back from. Chapter 4. Early the next morning, a blanket of fog covered the narrowed trail leading into the forest. Tom pulled on a thick coat, slipped a folding knife and a flashlight into his pocket. The GPS device had been disabled, but he had kept its receiver circuit intact to track any residual signal. A faint, blinking dot glowed on the small handheld screen, his starting point. The raccoon was looking a little stronger. When Tom opened the door, it unexpectedly stepped outside, moving with a limp but with eyes full of determination. He tried to shoo it back inside, but it trailed closely behind him, as if it already knew exactly where they were headed. Vermont's autumn forest carried an air of quiet mystery. Deep red maple leaves mingled with bright yellow, drifting down in waves to form a soft carpet underfoot. Thin strands of light filtered through the canopy, scattering shifting patterns of brightness and shadow across the ground. But the deeper they went, the heavier the air felt, and Tom began to notice an unusual silence. No bird calls, no squirrels darting through the branches. The receiver's signal grew stronger. By the time the sun was almost overhead, Tom and the raccoon came to a stop before a barbed wire fence. Nearly 10 feet tall, stretching out of sight in both directions. Beyond it, he could see the faint shapes of gray-painted metal buildings, broken up by rows of iron cages. Sounds drifted over, metallic clanging, and the weak cries of various animals, disjointed, like a melody being smothered. Tom followed the fence until he found a narrow gap where the ground sloped down. He slipped through, avoiding the barbs, and for the first time stepped into the hidden compound. The sight stopped his breath. Dozens of cages crammed together, holding deer, foxes, owls, even a young wolf, all thin, some clearly injured. The air was heavy with the stench of waste and blood. The raccoon suddenly darted away, weaving between cages until it stopped in front of a large one in the corner of the compound. Inside, alongside a few young animals of other species, Tom saw a small raccoon with pale gray fur and wide, frightened eyes pressed against the bars. The resemblance was unmistakable. This was its offspring. Tom's heartbeat pounded. He pulled out his knife and began forcing open nearby locks, freeing many animals that could run. Several deer bolted into the forest. The noise drew attention. From the metal buildings, 3 men in black uniforms emerged, carrying batons and radios. There was no time to lose. Tom broke the lock on the large cage. The mother raccoon rushed in, scooping its baby onto her back. But instead of fleeing, she turned toward another cage, where a young fox had its paw caught in the bars. She bit hard, freeing the fox. But at that moment, one of the men lunged forward and swung his baton. Tom threw himself in the way, taking the blow on his shoulder. Pain shot down his arm, but he still pulled the raccoon behind him, urging her to run. The other 2 men moved to block their path. Tom brandished the knife in a quick, sharp arc, enough to make them hesitate. His voice came out hoarse but unwavering. "Get out of my way." In the chaos, the freed animals began to scatter through the broken fence. The mother raccoon, still carrying her young, limped after them, but blood was now seeping from a fresh wound on her shoulder, the mark of that blow she had taken to save the fox. Tom scooped her up and ran. They tore through the forest, his breath merging with the hiss of the wind in the leaves. The thin silver light of a young moon now shone overhead, spilling across the winding trail. With every step, he could feel the animal's heartbeat and breathing in his arms, weak, but still warm. When they reached a safe mountain cleft, Tom stopped. The raccoon lifted her head to look at him, her eyes no longer filled with fear but with something else, absolute trust. She pressed her face gently into his hand, and the warmth of that gesture seemed to wash away the pain in his shoulder. Tom knew he had crossed a line. This was no longer just about saving a life. It was about stepping into a fight whose end he could not see. But in those eyes, he found a reason strong enough to keep going. Chapter 5. At dawn the next morning, the first light of day slipped through the heavy mist, laying a pale gold over the roof of Tom's wooden cabin. He woke with a sharp ache in his right arm, but the sound of birdsong outside eased his mind. On the table lay the latest issue of the local newspaper, delivered early. As always, the headline stretched across the front page: Illegal Wildlife Holding Facility Discovered, North Track Industries Under Investigation. The article reported that a volunteer forest protection group, working alongside authorities, had raided the compound and freed many captive animals. No one mentioned who had tipped them off, but Tom simply smiled as he read that part. The mother raccoon and her young had been taken by Tom to the town's wildlife rescue center. The staff there promised to care for them until they were strong enough to return to the forest. Standing outside the wire enclosure, Tom peered in through the mesh. The mother raccoon was resting with eyes half closed, while her baby clambered playfully onto her back, its round eyes bright with curiosity. In the days that followed, Tom returned to his usual routine, waking early, feeding the horses, tending the garden, and each evening brewing coffee to drink on the porch. But something subtle had taken root, a quiet change. He found himself paying closer attention to the sounds of the forest, to unfamiliar tracks in the soil, even to the faintest noises from far away. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he heard an unusual rustling at the forest's edge. Looking up, he saw her, the mother raccoon, healthy again, standing still in the gap between two trees. Beside her was the youngster, now bigger, its fur sleek and its eyes shining. They did not come closer. They only watched him. The look in their eyes, the same he had first seen in that old barn, was different now, calm, grateful, and free. The moment lasted only a few breaths before they turned and vanished into the deep green of the forest. Tom sat for a long while, eyes fixed on the place where they had disappeared. A soft breeze swept across the porch, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth, along with the flutter of falling maple leaves, and he realized he had left a small but permanent mark on their lives and on his own. Chapter 6. That afternoon, the sky wore a thin veil of clouds, softening the last light of the day as if filtered through a sheet of silk. Tom sat on his porch, the wooden chair creaking gently with each slow sway. Before him, the forest stretched endlessly, its whispering leaves like an ancient song he never grew tired of hearing. A steaming cup of coffee in hand, he thought back over the past days, from that quiet autumn afternoon, to the frantic moonlit escape, to the moment those eyes found his. Everything had happened so quickly it felt almost like a dream, yet it had left him with a sense more real than anything else. A voice rose in his mind, slow and steady, as if speaking aloud the thoughts he had not put into words. There are moments we do not choose, but we do choose how we respond, and sometimes it is a small creature, with eyes full of pain, that reminds us compassion needs no shared language, only a willing heart. Tom leaned back, his gaze never leaving the forest. Somewhere among those trees, the mother raccoon and her young were probably searching for food, or curled up in a warm nest. He did not know if he would ever see them again, and truthfully, he did not need to. A light breeze stirred, sending maple leaves spinning to the ground in slow, deliberate spirals. Their steady rustle sounded like a quiet thank you from deep in the woods. Tom smiled faintly, tightening his grip on the coffee cup, letting its warmth seep into his fingers, just like the warmth he had once felt through the cold, wet fur of a small creature in the dark. And there, in the space between man and nature, lay an invisible thread he knew would never break.